Hello everybody, welcome to and welcome back to my channel, Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and I hope you've been enjoying this reading of The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell, which is part of the Ghosts of Christmas Past Resurrected, a reading event hosted by Vin from Revenant Reads and a group of amazing co-hosts, of which I count myself to be among them and very lucky to be so. Let's push on with part 3. I wonder if, like me, you've been thinking about who could possibly be playing the organ in the house if it's not the wind? And as the old nurse was telling us, because it was proper tunes and music, it couldn't possibly be the wind. Let's carry on. I thought at first that it might be Miss Furnivall who played, unknown to Bessie, but one day, when I was in the hall by myself, I opened the organ and peeped all about it and around it, as I had done to the organ in Crosswaith Church once before, and I saw it was all broken and destroyed inside, though it looked so brave and fine. And then, though it was noonday, my flesh began to creep a little, and I shut it up and run away pretty quickly to my own bright nursery, and I did not like hearing the music for some time after that, any more than James and Dorothy did. All this time Miss Rosamond was making herself more and more beloved. The old ladies liked her to dine with them at their early dinner. James stood behind Miss Furnivall's chair, and I behind Miss Rosamond's, all in state, and after dinner she would play about in a corner of the great drawing-room, as still as any mouse, while Miss Furnivall slept, and I had my dinner in the kitchen. But she was glad enough to come to me in the nursery afterwards, for, as she said, Miss Furnivall was so sad, and Mrs. Stark so dull. But she and I were merry enough, and by I got not to care for that weird rolling music, which did one no harm if we did not know where it came from. That winter was very cold. In the middle of October, the frosts began and lasted many, many weeks. I remember one day at dinner, Miss Furnivall lifted up her sad, heavy eyes and said to Mrs. Stark, "I'm afraid we shall have a terrible winter," in a strange kind of meaning way. But Mrs. Stark pretended not to hear and talked very loud of something else. My little lady and I did not care for the frost, not we. As long as it was dry, we climbed up the steep brows behind the house and went up on the fells, which were bleak and bare enough, and there we ran races in the fresh, sharp air, and once we came down by a new path that took us past the 2 old gnarled holly trees, which grew about halfway down by the east side of the house. But the days grew shorter and shorter, and the old lord, if it was he, played away more and more stormily and sadly on the great organ. One Sunday afternoon, it must have been towards the end of November, I asked Dorothy to take charge of little Missy when she came out of the drawing-room after Mrs. Furnivall had had her nap, for it was too cold to take her with me to church, and yet I wanted to go. And Dorothy was glad enough to promise, and was so fond of the child that all seemed well, and Bessie and I set off very briskly, though the sky hung heavy and black over the white earth, as if the night had never fully gone away, and the air, though still, was very biting and keen. "We shall have a fall of snow," said Bessie to me, and sure enough, even while we were in church, it came down thick in great large flakes, so thick it almost darkened the windows. It had stopped snowing before we came out, but it lay soft, thick and deep beneath our feet as we tramped home. Before we got to the hall, the moon rose, and I think it was lighter then. What with the moon and what with the white dazzling snow, than it had been when we went to church between 2 and 3 o'clock. I have not told you that Miss Furnivall and Mrs. Stark never went to church. They used to read the prayers together in their quiet, gloomy way. They seemed to feel the Sunday very long, without their tapestry work to be busy at. So when I went to Dorothy in the kitchen to fetch Miss Rosamond and take her upstairs with me, I did not much wonder when the old woman told me that the ladies had kept the child with them, and that she had never come to the kitchen, as I had bidden her, when she was tired of behaving pretty in the drawing-room. So I took off my things and went to find her, and bring her to supper in the nursery. But when I went into the best drawing-room, there sat the 2 old ladies, very still and quiet, dropping out a word now and then, but looking as if nothing so bright and merry as Miss Rosamond had ever been near them. Still, I thought she might be hiding from me. It was one of her pretty ways, and that she had persuaded them to look as if they knew nothing about her. So I went softly peeping under this sofa and behind that chair, making believe I was sadly frightened at not finding her. "What's the matter, Hester?" said Mrs. Stark sharply. I don't know if Miss Thurniville had seen me, for as I told you, she was very deaf, and she sat quite still, idly staring into the fire with her hopeless face. I'm only looking for my little Rosie, Posy, replied I, still thinking that the child was there, near me, though I could not see her. Miss Rosamond is not here, said Mrs. Stark. She went away more than an hour ago to find Dorothy, and she too turned and went on looking into the fire. My heart sank at this, and I began to wish I had never left my darling. I went back to Dorothy and told her. James was gone out for the day, but she and me and Bessie took lights and went up into the nursery first, and then we roamed over the great large house, calling and entreating Miss Rosamond to come out of her hiding place and not frighten us to death in that way. But there was no answer, no sound. Oh, said I at last, can she have got into the east wing and hidden there? But Dorothy said it was not possible, for that she herself had never been in there, that the doors were always locked, and my Lord Steward had the keys. She believed, at any rate, neither she nor James had ever seen them. So I said I would go back and see if, after all, she was not hidden in the drawing-room, unknown to the old ladies, and if I found her there, I said, I would whip her well for the fright she had given me, but I never meant to do it. Well, I went back to the west drawing-room, and I told Mrs. Stark we could not find her anywhere, and asked for leave to look all about the furniture there, for I thought now that she might have fallen asleep in some warm hidden corner. But no. We looked. Miss Furniville got up and looked, trembling all over, and she was nowhere there. Then we set off again, every one in the house, and looked in all the places we had searched before, but we could not find her. Miss Furniville shivered and shook so much that Mrs. Stark took her back into the warm drawing-room, but not before they had made me promise to bring her to them when she was found. Well a day! I began to think she never would be found. When I bethought me to look out into the great front court, all covered with snow, I was upstairs when I looked out, but it was such clear moonlight. Apologies. I could see quite plain 2 little footprints, which might be traced from the hall door and round the corner to the east wing. I don't know how I got down, but I tugged open the great stiff hall door, and throwing the skirt of my gown over my head for a cloak, I ran out. I turned the east corner, and there a black shadow fell on the snow. But when I came again into the moonlight, there were the little footmarks going up to the fells. It was bitter cold, so cold that the air almost took the skin off my face as I ran, but I ran on, crying to think how my poor little darling must be perished and frightened. I was within sight of the holly trees when I saw a shepherd coming down the hill, bearing something in his arms wrapped in his maud. He shouted to me and asked me if I had lost a bairn, and when I could not speak for crying, he bore towards me, and I saw my wee bairnie lying still and white and stiff in his arms, as if she had been dead. He told me he had been up the fells to gather his sheep before the deep cold of night came on, and that under the holly trees, black marks on the hillside where no other bush was for miles around, he had found my little lady, my lamb, my queen, my darling, stiff and cold, in the terrible sleep which is frost begotten. Oh, the joy and the tears of having her in my arms once again, for I would not let him carry her, but took her, more than all, into my own arms, and held her near my own warm neck and heart, and felt the life stealing slowly back again into her little gentle limbs. But she was still insensible when we reached the hall, and I had no breath for speech. We went in by the kitchen door. Bring the warming pan, said I, and I carried her up the stairs and began undressing her by the nursery fire, which Bessie had kept up. I called my little Lammy all the sweet and playful names I could think of, even while my eyes were blinded by my tears, and at length she opened her large blue eyes. Then I put her into the warm bed and sent Dorothy down to tell Mrs. Furniville that all was well, and I made up my mind to sit by my darling's bedside the livelong night. She fell away into a soft sleep as soon as her pretty head had touched the pillow, and I watched by her till morning light, when she wakened up bright and clear, or so I thought at first, and my dears, so I think now. She said that she had fancied that she could like to go to Dorothy, for that both the old ladies were asleep, and it was very dull in the drawing-room, and that as she was going through the west lobby, she saw the snow through the high window falling soft and steady, but she wanted to see it lying pretty and white on the ground, so she made her way into the great hall, and then going to the window, she saw it bright and soft upon the drive. But while she stood there, she saw a little girl, not so old as she was, but so pretty, said my darling, and this little girl beckoned to me to come out, and oh, she was so pretty and so sweet, I could not choose but go, and then this other little girl had taken her by the hand, and side by side the two had gone round the east corner. Oh, I think we better stop there, don't you? I'll be back soon with part 4. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.